Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's episode of the First Gen 101 podcast. Today, we have Cesar Margarito with us. Cesar, thank you for being here today.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're a first generation graduate, but you're also very passionate about helping first generation students. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation. And before we go into your background, tell us about Fly Socks and how are you helping first generation students that way?
So, Fly Socks is a little venture I started in 2019, right before COVID, unfortunately. And the idea behind that was to utilize the proceeds to provide scholarships for first-gen students. It was right around that time, like other companies that had a philanthropic or social responsibility focus or emphasis were coming up, right? So I figured, what if we did something like that? Most people wear socks, right? I had just moved to LA a couple years before that, and here people are a little bit more trendy than where I came from. And I was getting into like colorful socks and those kinds of things. So I'm like, let me look at this. Why not? So that's where the idea originated and why the colorful socks and example or various samples and things of that. But more than anything, it was just a way for me to find another option to help students like myself, right? They were first generation students.
That is a great way to help first generation students. So for those of you who are listening or watching, make sure that you check that out. But let's go back and tell us about your background. What was it like growing up as a first generation student?
I think one of the identities you have to add to that is immigrant.
Hmm.
So I'm originally from Jalisco, Mexico, a small little tiny town outside of Guadalajara, and my parents were migrant field workers. So when before I was born, when my siblings were older, they were doing the back and forth game. They were in California for part of the year, see the crop would be over, then they go to Mexico and then back and forth. But when I was around 10 years old, they decided to make the permanent move without telling us that we're going to be moving to the States. So at 10 years old, fifth grade, towards the end of fifth grade, that was my first experience with the U.S. education system. In a little town in Central California, Monterey County, called Chular, really tiny town. When I was growing up, it was about 500 people. Now it's a metropolis. It's about 1,500 people, like New York, right?
Yes. So I recall just from we were talking about similarities when before we started the episode, and I mentioned I'm from Mexico City, and very much we were kind of just told that we were going to be moving. And one day I was in Mexico City, and the next day I was in Rockland County, which happens to also be a small town in New York. Many people, when I say New York, think New York City, but I'm actually
Yeah.
a little bit north or up in the suburbs. So you're starting in the U.S. educational system, and you mentioned it was a small town. How was
Mhm.
the process of getting accustomed to the new culture? Were you working while you were going to school? Because I know that tends to be some of the experiences for a lot of students who grew up in California.
Yeah, fortunately, at that age, I was not. I did have a lot of friends that became friends who did have to go work on the weekends or during the summers. It wasn't until high school that was my first experience, like working in the fields. But during elementary, it was more the transition of acclimating to a new country, new language, all those different things. But my little sister and I, she's 3 years younger than I was the default babysitter. So maybe that's why I didn't have to work. But yeah, so it was that transition. I think more than anything, it was the language. One of the good things about that area, if you're not familiar, it's a predominantly Latino community. 99% of the Latinos are Mexican for the most part. Very few African American or white students in that community. So in terms of making that transition from a racial standpoint, it wasn't all that different. It was just the language. And then seeing students that looked like me, but some of them didn't speak Spanish, and that was a little confusing to me because I'd never seen brown skin, black hair, I had hair back then, boys and girls not being able to speak Spanish, right? So it was that transition, and I'm very fortunate and grateful for the students, the friends that I made. They took me under the wing, taught me the language, taught me the customs, and took me in as early as fifth and sixth grade, and just snowballed from there.
You mentioned language being one of the primary challenges. So I remember
Mhm.
when I was going to college, and I never told my mother that I was going to college because she just didn't know what to do. Like she always wanted to help, and she was always very. She worked very hard for my brother and I, and we also grew up also in a very small town, like I mentioned. But the idea of going to college was very foreign to her, and so in your family, how did that conversation start? Was there a point where in your high school years you were like, okay, I'm going to college because of these reasons? Was it more like your parents pushed you that way? How did that decision to go to college happen for you?
It wasn't really much of a choice. It was just known. And that's the reason my parents, so there's four siblings in our family. My little sister and I are the two youngest, and I have an older sister and brother. So when we first made that move, the family was split. So it was the younger siblings that came with the parents to get a feel, get situated, all of those things. And about a year, 2 years later, then my older siblings came over. And the reason we all migrated, or my parents made that decision, was exactly because of education. So they knew that education was the only ticket out of poverty. And when you're poor and you're around other poor students, you don't know you're poor. You have roof over your head, food on your table, nothing fancy, simple, frijoles and tortillas kind of thing. You have everything that you need, right? So we didn't know that, but that was something that was instilled from a very early age that you're going to school, you're going to college. They couldn't articulate, they couldn't tell you, okay, this is the path. First, you're going to get an AA, then a BS or MA, all that stuff. But they just knew that you were going to school, you were going to college. And that was just ingrained in all of us at the very young age. So when my older siblings came, they were too old for high school, so they actually enrolled in the community college. So they were actually the pioneers in terms of higher education. And because of that, like a lot of minority communities, we're very, what's the word? It's escaping me right now, but because so and so did it, that you're going to go do it too, as well,
Okay,
right?
okay. A
So
little role
because of my
model.
siblings went, it's definitely the role model, but because we went there, it wasn't just gonna you're gonna go to college, you're gonna go to that college.
I see.
But I knew that I was gonna go to community college first,
Mhm.
right? That was my first entry. And then I didn't know what I was gonna study, what to do, or anything like that. I knew that's where I was going. That thought was always there. I was a slow student. I had the brains for it, but I was a little bit more mischievous. Once I got acclimated, language, all those different things, right? I can express myself and not always in a positive or constructive way. But I got through junior high, I got through high school, fortunately. And because I was going to go to a community college, I ignored some of the outreach services that our local 4 years provided to go to a 4 year institution. I wasn't aware about the attrition rates at community colleges, all those things that I hear about. And I didn't really care at the point. I'm like, my siblings went there, it was good enough for them. I'm gonna go there. But it was the idea that we're always gonna go to school was ingrained from a very young age. It's just they couldn't articulate the path or how go about it. So we kind of had to learn on our own.
I was actually the first one who went to community college, and I am a big, big supporter of community colleges, especially for people like us who going into college. We may not know why we're going to college. We know that's what we should be doing. In your
Mhm.
case, did you go into community college with a career path in mind? Do you say to yourself, "Oh, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor"? What did that look like for you?
TV has always had a big influence. And I think that's why, from an early age, once we moved, I don't know if you remember the TV series Chips.
Yes, yeah, of course.
Yes. So I wanted to be a highway patrol,
Mm.
right? So through high school, that was my idea. Like, I'm going to get out of high school and then, yeah, go to college, but I want to be a highway patrol officer. So that plan was there throughout all of high school and even my first year at community college. I think I still had that idea. But by that time, my older sister had transferred, finished school. She went to UC Santa Cruz. She became a teacher. So then again, this whole concept of education, the importance of it, it steered me in that way. I'm like, okay, maybe I could be a teacher. All right. And then once I started taking classes at community college, like history classes, I really had really good instructors. So I'm like, hey, this is cool. Like maybe I can do this. So then it went from highway patrol to history teacher, like a high school history teacher. So while I was at community college, that was the plan. And even after I transferred, that was still my idea that I wanted to be a teacher. So I pivoted a little bit, but once I transferred, that was a very different experience. Being away from home for the first time, being in a primarily white community. In my classes, I was a history major. In a room of 30, there might have been maybe two or three people of color. So all of those different things, the culture shock that I went through really impacted my academics. So I found myself going back home pretty much every week. And at that time, I had a girlfriend, so it was also because I had a girlfriend, right? But academically, I just struggled a lot. And like I said, even though my parents emphasized education, they didn't have the tools to help us navigate the process, especially the hidden curriculum that we
Mm.
talk about. So when they would ask me, "Oh, how are classes? How are you doing?" I could just brush it off. "Oh, I'm fine." And never mind, I just got a letter saying I was on academic probation for the second or third time. But as long as I told them I was fine, they took it at my word. Right?
So this is you hit on the nail of the purpose of this podcast is to show those examples. Transferred, was it like the choice to go to the community college? Did you transfer to your 4 year institution because your sister was doing it, or did you have more of a conscious decision of where you were going to transfer?
I chose the institution that I went to because my brother went there.
Okay.
So he went to a different school, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And then when we were getting, I meant my community college friends, were in the application process, I heard some of them talking about, oh, I'm going to go to Cal Poly. I'm like, oh, I'll apply there too. I'll check off the box. So there was really no intentionality. I was just flaring out there. But the name recognition, my brother went there, my friends are going there. Okay, let me see if I can go there too. So I only applied to three universities, all in state in California. Two of them, I thought I could be on their soccer team. I played soccer at community college, and that was my carrot to stay in school and do well enough to be eligible to play. So that's what I thought. And the other two institutions that I applied to, I also got in. So I got into all three institutions, but I chose San Luis Obispo because of my friends. My brother had gone there. So I had no idea what that campus was like. And looking back, and this is another shared with other folks, is that even though my brother went there and he knew, I think he knew that I was going to go there, we never talked. We never had that conversation for him to prepare me saying, this is the culture shock you're going to see. This is how it's going to be on day one. And actually, the first day I ever stepped on that campus wasn't the day to help him move out and go back home once he graduated. So we weren't there at the same time, but I didn't really have a plan other than just thinking about it in that linear that, okay, I'm going to community college, then I'm going to go to 4 year, and then I'm going to get a job. And at that time, I was still thinking I'm going to be a teacher, so I'm going to be a history teacher, so I'm going to major in history.
Was there someone in your college that helped you navigate the college experience?
It took a while. So I consider myself a bit of a professional student. I was at my community college, I was there for 3 years. And then once I transferred, it took me another 4 years to get my bachelor's. And as I mentioned earlier, when I first transferred, I had a girlfriend back home. So I was going home every weekend. So I never had the forethought of I need to build community here because come Friday afternoon, I'm on the road and back home is an hour and a half and I need to be there because we got plans Friday night. And then Monday morning, I'd come back to campus and I'd do it all over again. And it wasn't until we broke up, unfortunately, that forced me to not go home anymore and then stay on campus, stay in the town, try to find community. Initially, one of the guys that I transferred with, he ended up becoming best friends. We were roommates together. And some of our friends who had gone straight from high school to that college were our neighbors. So initially, that was my initial hub of friends, and then through them, met other people, and that was always safe, right? Because you had somebody else to make that introduction, make that connection. I think the first experience is one of the scariest ones in my life. I joined this student club. I grew up very timid, very shy kid, but I always wanted to dance traditional folklorico. I thought it was so cool growing up and everything, but I just didn't have the courage. The university had a group, still has the group. So I found out when they practice and where and all those. None of my other friends were into that, so that was the one of the first things I did by myself. And that group was so welcoming. That really is what changed my experience because all of a sudden my community grew exponentially. And it wasn't just the 4 or 5 friends from back home that were my neighbors. Now it was these guys from all over the state, different majors, all these different things. And that's really what helped me in terms of socially adjust to the university. The academics was a whole other thing. But again, I struggled through it. And one of the things that later on I found out is that And I'm sure you see this too. Students oftentimes put up a front, right, when they're going through it because they don't want anybody else to know that they're not doing well, that there's something wrong, that they need help. And that's what I found out till afterwards. Like I said, my best friend later on, and he was in the room right next to me. I found out he was on academic probation. I'm like, dude, I've been on academic probation. Let me walk you through it. But again, it was one of those things that you want to save face, right? Or for whatever reason you do it, that oftentimes you don't make yourself vulnerable enough to ask questions, ask for help. But it wasn't until I connect with those other folks that I really felt like I had that sense of community at the university to help me get through it and help overcome a little bit more of those adjustments, especially with the culture shock.
I also struggled academically in the beginning. And for me, looking back, had I asked the professor or academic support services, and I think I didn't do all these things because I just lacked confidence. As you're navigating, I want to talk about careers because this is a big thing because it's one thing to go to college and to go through the struggles and to go through the learning process. For many first gens, the next big challenge is getting a job. What did that process look like for you?
As I got through further along in my the 4 year, then I didn't want to be a teacher. I want to be a counselor because I felt I could make a bigger difference or a difference in a different way outside of the classroom. So that was my mentality is I want to be a counselor. But when I graduated, I hadn't done my homework beforehand to look at credential programs, like all these things to set up and apply. So my first job out of graduation with a college degree was actually at Staples. I worked at Staples for a couple months that summer while I was trying to figure it out. And around that time, like towards the end of the summer, I came across this posting for Migrant Head Start, right? And the title of it was called Family Service Advocates. And the description, I'm like, helping kids, helping families in the school system, migrant. It was like checking all these boxes off for me, right? Like that I can identify with. So I started that job at the end of the summer and I really loved it. I really enjoyed it. About 6 months later, in trying to help one of those families find information about college, I called the university and I spoke with this woman. She gave me the information, and then she's, oh, by the way, in a couple of months, there's this job opening that's going to happen. It's working, doing outreach, college outreach with junior high and high school students in the local area, blah, 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 blah. So just think about it. And that was like light bulb went off. I'm like, perfect, that's what I want to do. So sure enough, I looked for that job posting. It opened up. I applied. I got the job. So I started. And that was really my path to where I'm at now is getting that entry level position. I'm not familiar with TRIO programs. This was Educational Talent Search. It was the first grant that the university had received for that program. And I was one of two initial outreach advisors, counselors, what have you. And I loved it. Going to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, talk about college, talk to parents, and yeah, it opened up the whole world. It inspired me down the line to go back to school. But initially, like I said, at grad school, it was good old Staples, and while I figured things out,
Share with us, what are you doing now and how are you helping first gen? Because I know you're very involved in the education system.
I try, and I think any role that you're in education, you're always helping others. Or the reason you get into it is to help others, right? The scale is what differs. You might do it one student at a time, one classroom at a time, one campus at a time. But that job led me to then eventually get a master's. And oftentimes it's timing. When I was wrapping up my master's, it was at that same university, a administrative position opened up. Then I needed a master's for. So and it was in our same department with another TRIO program, student support services. I have the background and the experience working with the populations, so I got the job. And so that was my first role in terms of an administrative role. I was still hands-on with students, but a little bit more on the back end. So then you're looking at policies, procedures, systems, and things that you can or can't change, right? Something else that you're learning, they have to learn. But that was the first role that kind of opened up my eyes in terms of more than just working here one on one. Because ever since then, the roles that I've had, for the most part, have been working in an administrative capacity with various programs, and the scale of it has grown. One of the first major programs that I worked with was helping create the infrastructure for the Gates Scholarship that launched in 2016. It's still ran by the Hispanic Scholarship Fund. So I was their director of university advocacy. So my role was to create partnerships with the universities across the country and their support services systems that map out like the student journey and all these different things. But that was really what opened up my experience working nationwide. Currently, I'm working here in California at the Foundation for California Community Colleges. So the organization has been around about 25 years, and they're a very well kept secret because I didn't know who they were until I applied. And other people that I talked to that come on board, a lot of them are the same thing. I didn't know this existed until I got here. But their role is to help support the chancellor's office at the state level, but also work with districts and community colleges around the state. So the team that I'm on, I help oversee some scholarships, grants, and disaster relief aid around the state. And again, these are things that I'm probably never going to meet any of the students that benefit from these programs, but the fact that I play a small part in being able to support these larger initiatives, that's what fuels my passion. And the fact that it's with community college students, where we both come from, makes it even better.
I often hear students, I want to go to college, and then immediately after college, I want to go straight into graduate school or law school in our case. But I also think there's
Mhm.
value in maybe getting a job in a field that seems interesting to you, and maybe from there figure out if it needs more education, and maybe then can pursue a graduate degree. Because sometimes I just feel like students are just accelerated, like they're rushing to somewhere, and what I've been seeing is that's only leading to more debt. And
Mhm.
so, on that note, and from your perspective and your position, what do you think are the biggest challenges for first generation students today?
Oh God, how much time do we have?
Ah, just a
No,
few, just a few.
it's just a few. Yeah, no, I think it really depends where you're looking at. If you're looking early on in the career, or I'm sorry, in their schooling, sometimes it's a lack of preparation, right? That they have to struggle to kind of catch up and all those different things. But where I'm at right now, or to better answer your question, is so right now I'm finishing up my doctoral program. I'll finish this year. And my dissertation is looking at the transitional experience of first generation professionals. And the reason I'm looking at that is because when I was working at that with the college students, what I started to see, and also from my personal experience and observations, is that once students enter the workforce, they didn't like it, oftentimes, right? Or it's not what they thought it was, whether it was the culture of the organizations, companies, what have you. So oftentimes they pivot. I think if you look at the numbers, depending on where you're looking at, 30 to 40% of college grads end up kind of leaving their industry. So that's what's interesting to me now. And what I'm hoping to study and find out a little bit more, or what I find out through the study that can hopefully help inform the 4 year setting and maybe high school as well, so that students are understanding more about the workplace before they get there, so they can mentally prepare and how to acclimate and navigate that process. And obviously, not every student goes through that. But I think, again, the percentage that I cited can vary. But that's what ends up happening, right? Is you, like me, I had a bachelor's degree, I was working at Staples because I didn't know what else I was going to do. But oftentimes, even if it's the dream job or because we were good at science, someone told us to be an engineer, right? But then you get there, you know what? I don't really like being in a cubicle for 8 hours a day. I want to be out with people. I had a lot of stories like that as students. So I think the earlier we can have those conversations, get students exposed, they start thinking beyond just the subjects. I might be good at history, I might be good at math. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be X, right? Because even if you get to that point, you might find out that, you know what, it's not really what I thought it was going to be. So I think the more we can expose students early on, and certainly at the 4 year, that likelihood of them succeeding and persevering in their field especially with all the challenges and struggles that students go through, will definitely pay off because, like you said, you take on this whole debt and you got this big old shiny plaque on your wall. But if you're working at a job that's not connected, related, and certainly the pay is not there, when are you going to be able to pay off those loans? So that's kind of what's interesting to me now. And I have nieces and nephews now. Actually, one of them, she just started San Luis Obispo. We've had conversations about grad school and working. And in some fields, it's definitely needed. In education, you definitely, for the most part, need at least a master's degree, if not more. And some technical fields, maybe not, right? And some definitely certifications and you're golden. So it can vary by field, but I think the more we start thinking about how you're going to be able to apply what you're learning, the type of environment you're going into, and talk to as many people as possible, I think that's probably the biggest win we could have for students.
Speaking to people as a way to understand, one of the topics that we like to cover here is mentorships. How would you describe a mentor? Do you ask someone to be a mentor? Has somebody come up to you and say, "Hey, would you be my mentor?" Or have you ever gone to someone and say, "Hey, I'm gonna be your mentor," or "Can you be my mentee?" Like, how does that work? How do you even start that relationship?
It hasn't happened to me, but I have seen people give the same advice. But it always feels awkward to me because again, I'm by nature I'm a very timid person. So I think for me, it's more of identifying folks and trying to build a relationship without necessarily making that ask. I'm sure if you make that ask, it'll probably be a lot more beneficial. But I think I'm pretty good about the types of questions that I wonder from them, that I want to know more of, and the reason why. So I think having that one, what is a mentor, right? It's that guy that can help you avoid pitfalls along the way, right? If you want to define it in that way. And in terms of obtaining it, sometimes it feels kind of like very formal that you have to make that ask, right? But I don't think you do because you might have some people that you might only interact with them a couple times a year or every other year, a text or a phone call or something, right? But they're always there. And there are other people you might see more on a regular basis that you might go to them more frequently for other types of advice. So I think you can have different types of mentors for different things without necessarily having to formally identify and say, hey, you're going to be my mentor, I'm going to be your mentee, or can I be your mentee? I think that's another way of going about it as well.
As we come to an end, what would you say is your biggest achievement as a first generation graduate?
I think the answer is in the question, being a graduate.
Hmm.
If you look at statistics, especially for men of color, numbers go down with every educational sector. So the fact that, like I said, I was very mischievous when I was younger, not in a bad way, Dennis the Menace sort of thing. So the fact that I got through all the way, and just the other day I was looking at the stats for individuals with doctoral degrees. Like in the US, about 3% of the population have a doctoral degree. When you look at Latinos, especially Latino men, it's 0.1%.
Wow.
So the fact that I'm like, actually, I have my proposal defense later in October. So like, I can almost see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I think that'll be one of my biggest achievements.
I didn't know how low, and I'm shocked, but I'm also not surprised. It's important to show these numbers, and maybe there's a way we can do that better, maybe through this podcast or through other mediums, because numbers tell a story. And sometimes we say, "Oh, there aren't a lot," but when you say a percentage that's less than one, it's really eye-opening.
And I think, yeah, and I think it's also in how we change the narrative, right? Oftentimes when we list someone as a statistic with a negative connotation, right? But depending on the statistic that you're trying to cite, it can be a good thing. So I think that's also how we can start changing the narrative a little bit is the types of statistics we use when we use them. Yeah.
Right. So, is there anything else that you would like to add? Is there anything that you want our listeners to hear, either advice from your experience, anything that you feel should be said?
For one, thank you for having this platform to amplify the voices, as I said earlier. I think the more stories we get out there, especially people that come from backgrounds that we came from might look like us. Hopefully, some with more hair than I do. But I think seeing those examples that they can do it too. So that's one. And then two, or I guess two more other things. One is it's never too late to start and make that change. be another. And along with that is asking for help. Because I think you mentioned it earlier as well, that had you asked for help at certain stages, things would have been a little bit different. And I think that's oftentimes we don't allow ourselves because of whatever, pride or anything else that you say, I got to get through this on my own. But no, if there's kind of support that you can look at, get it.
Thank you very much for being with us today. I appreciate your advice and the information, and I'm sure there will be many of us who are going to listen to this episode at least more than once. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Miguel.